The Quiet Visit. Los Angeles, June 1979. The summer sun hung softly over the sprawling city, casting golden light across the white walls of the UCLA Medical Center. Outside the hospital, traffic hummed like a distant river, indifferent to the quiet battle being fought inside one small room on the 5th floor. Room 544. Inside that room lay a man whose voice had once echoed across the American West on cinema screens around the world. John Wayne. For decades he had been larger than life, a towering figure with a deliberate stride, a deep voice, and the unmistakable presence of a man who carried his own code of honor. Audiences had watched him ride across deserts, face down villains, and stand tall against impossible odds. But now the man known to millions as the Duke rested quietly against a stack of hospital pillows, his once powerful frame diminished by illness. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and clean linens. Machines stood silently nearby, their blinking lights measuring the rhythm of a body that had fought hard for 72 years. Outside the door, a few reporters waited patiently in the hallway. They knew history was nearing its final chapter. But inside the room, there were no cameras. No applause. No dramatic speeches. Just a quiet moment between two people whose lives had crossed paths many years before. The door opened gently. A woman stepped inside. Her posture was straight and dignified, and the light from the hallway framed her fiery auburn hair. Even at 59 years old, she carried the unmistakable presence that had captivated audiences for decades. Maureen O'Hara. To the world, she was a celebrated actress known for her fierce intelligence and fearless performances. To John Wayne, she was something rarer in Hollywood. An equal. She closed the door softly behind her. For a moment she stood still, taking in the sight before her. The last time she had seen John Wayne, he had been standing tall, speaking confidently at a public event just a few weeks earlier. Even then, the illness had been working quietly inside him, but his determination had kept him moving forward. Now the reality was impossible to ignore. His face was thinner, his breathing slower, yet the familiar spark in his eyes remained. That spark had never been something illness could touch. Maureen walked slowly toward the chair beside his bed and sat down without a word. The room was quiet. Outside, the distant sound of footsteps echoed down the hospital corridor. Inside, the only sound was the soft rise and fall of Wayne's breathing. For nearly 20 minutes they sat like that. No greetings. No speeches. Just silence. It was the kind of silence that exists between people who have already said everything that truly matters. Finally, Wayne opened his eyes fully and turned his head slightly toward her. "You came," he said softly. His voice was weaker than she remembered, but it still carried the familiar tone of calm certainty. Maureen nodded once. "Of course I came." A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. Even now, even with illness weighing heavily on his body, there was something unmistakably steady about him. The same quiet strength that had defined his career seemed to linger beneath the surface. "I thought you might be busy," he said. She leaned back slightly in the chair. "Nothing important enough to keep me away." For a moment he studied her face. The same determined expression he had seen so many times on film sets. The same eyes that had challenged him during countless scenes. It had been nearly 30 years since they first worked together. 30 years since the cameras rolled on a Western film that would change both their careers. Rio Grande. The memory seemed to float through the room like a ghost from another era. Back in 1950, the world had looked very different. Hollywood was at the height of its golden age. The studio system controlled nearly everything. Actors followed strict contracts, strict schedules, and strict expectations. But from the moment Maureen O'Hara stepped onto that set, she made one thing clear. She would not be controlled. John Wayne had noticed immediately. Most actresses arriving on a Western set were cautious around him. His reputation alone was enough to intimidate newcomers. But Maureen had walked onto the set with calm confidence. She looked him directly in the eye and spoke to him as if they were equals. That alone had impressed him. Their first scene together was intense. The script called for emotional confrontation. Two characters carrying years of unresolved tension finally facing each other. Director John Ford had watched carefully from behind the camera. When he called action, something remarkable happened. Neither actor held back. Wayne delivered his lines with his trademark strength. But Maureen responded with something even stronger. Control. Her voice remained steady. Her posture never wavered. And when the scene demanded that Wayne's character grab her arm in anger, she didn't retreat. She stood taller. Her eyes never left his. The crew noticed immediately. The energy between them was electric. When the scene ended, Ford called cut and waited. Wayne looked at Maureen for several seconds. Then he nodded. A simple gesture. But in the world of professional actors, it meant something important. Respect. From that moment forward, their working relationship became something unique. They pushed each other, scene after scene, film after film, not through competition alone, but through a shared understanding that great performances required honesty. Over the years, they would appear together in 5 films. Rio Grande, The Quiet Man, McLintock, Big Jake, and one more collaboration that strengthened their professional bond. Audiences saw the chemistry on screen. What they didn't see was the quiet understanding behind it. There was no rivalry, no ego, just 2 performers committed to doing their work as well as possible. Back in the hospital room, Wayne shifted slightly against the pillows. The movement required effort. Maureen noticed immediately. "Don't move too much," she said quietly. He chuckled softly. "You still giving orders?" She raised an eyebrow. "You never listened anyway." For a moment they both smiled. It was the same rhythm they had shared decades earlier on film sets. But now the circumstances were different. Time had placed them in a room where every word carried greater weight. Wayne looked toward the window where afternoon sunlight filtered through the blinds. "You remember the set in Ireland?" he asked. "The Quiet Man," she said immediately. He nodded slowly. That was something. The Quiet Man had been more than just another film. It had been a story deeply connected to Maureen's Irish heritage. Filmed in the countryside of Ireland, it told the story of an American boxer seeking peace in a small Irish village. Wayne played the boxer. Maureen played the spirited woman who challenged him at every turn. The film demanded emotional intensity, physical commitment, and genuine trust between actors. One scene in particular had become legendary. A confrontation between their characters escalated into a dramatic moment when Maureen's character slapped Wayne's. The scene required perfect timing. Too soft and the moment would feel false. Too hard and someone could get hurt. When the cameras rolled, Maureen delivered the slap with remarkable precision. The sound echoed across the set. Wayne barely reacted. He stayed completely in character. After the scene ended, the crew burst into laughter. Ford simply nodded with satisfaction. It was exactly what the story needed. Back in the hospital room decades later, Wayne's voice softened. "You never treated me like a movie star." Maureen shrugged lightly. "You weren't one on set." He smiled faintly. That's why the scenes worked. She looked at him carefully. Despite the illness, despite the physical weakness, there was still a quiet dignity in the way he spoke. He had never chased attention, never demanded admiration. He simply did the work. And that, more than anything else, had earned the loyalty of audiences for decades. Outside the hospital room, the hallway remained busy with doctors, nurses, and visitors. Inside, time seemed to move slower. Maureen folded her hands in her lap. "Do you regret anything?" she asked gently. Wayne considered the question. His gaze drifted back toward the window. "Not much," he said. A pause followed. Then he added quietly, "I worked hard. I tried to do things the right way." She nodded. That answer sounded exactly like him. Practical, direct, without drama. The sunlight in the room slowly shifted as the afternoon progressed. Shadows stretched across the floor. The world outside continued its ordinary rhythm. But inside room 544, something rare was happening. Two people were remembering a lifetime of work, a lifetime of discipline, and a partnership built not on fame or romance, but on mutual respect. Finally, Wayne turned his head again. Maureen? Yes. His voice was barely louder than a whisper now. There's something I've been thinking about. She leaned slightly closer to hear him clearly. What is it? He studied her face for a moment. And then he spoke words she would remember for the rest of her life. The room was quiet again after John Wayne spoke her name. Maureen O'Hara leaned slightly closer to the bed, her posture still straight, her expression calm but attentive. She had spent decades around actors, directors, and producers, and she understood something about moments like this. Sometimes the words spoken quietly carried more meaning than any grand speech ever delivered on a film set. John Wayne's breathing was slow and measured. The illness had taken much from him physically, but the clarity in his eyes had not faded. Those eyes had faced down imaginary gunfighters, warlords, and outlaws in countless films, yet now they held a different kind of strength. It was the strength of a man reflecting on the road behind him. Outside the hospital window, the late afternoon sun began to soften, casting warm golden light across the room. The city of Los Angeles continued its usual rhythm below, cars moving along the streets, people going about their day, unaware that inside one hospital room a quiet chapter of Hollywood history was reaching its final pages. Wayne studied Maureen for a moment before speaking again. You remember the first day we worked together? He asked. She allowed a small smile to form. I remember it clearly, she replied. You walked onto the set like you owned half the state of Arizona. Wayne let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like a laugh. I probably thought I did. Maureen shook her head slightly. No, she said calmly. You didn't act like you owned it, you acted like you were responsible for it. That distinction mattered to her. Even all those years ago, she had noticed something different about him. Many actors carried their fame like a crown, but John Wayne carried it more like a duty. On the set, he arrived prepared, knew his lines, respected the crew, and never treated anyone as if they were beneath him. Wayne turned his gaze toward the ceiling, as if searching through the long corridor of memory. I remember thinking you were trouble, he admitted. Maureen raised an eyebrow. Trouble? He nodded slowly. You walked onto that set with no fear at all. Most actresses back then tried to be agreeable. You didn't. Her expression remained composed, but the memory warmed her voice. I wasn't there to be agreeable, she said. I was there to do the job properly. That was the heart of their partnership. Neither of them cared much for the social games that often surrounded Hollywood. They respected craft, they respected discipline, and above all, they respected honesty in performance. Wayne closed his eyes briefly, as if gathering strength. You remember that scene in Rio Grande, he said quietly, when Ford had us face each other after all those years apart. Maureen nodded. I remember. It had been a powerful scene. Two characters carrying years of unresolved tension meeting again after time and distance had hardened their emotions. Ford had demanded absolute authenticity from both of them. There were no shortcuts allowed on his sets. The crew went silent after that take, Wayne said. Maureen allowed herself a small laugh. That's because nobody expected the scene to feel so real. Wayne opened his eyes again. It felt real because you didn't play it safe. She considered his words carefully. She had always believed that acting required a certain courage, the willingness to reveal emotional truth without hiding behind theatrical gestures. You didn't play it safe either, she replied. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The hospital room remained filled with the soft hum of medical equipment and the distant sounds of footsteps in the hallway. Finally, Wayne shifted slightly and continued. You know something strange about that day? What? I realized something during that scene. Maureen leaned forward slightly. What did you realize? Wayne's voice lowered, but it remained steady. I realized I wasn't acting against a co-star. I was acting against someone who was pushing me. That was perhaps the greatest compliment an actor could receive. Hollywood was full of polite performances where actors merely recited lines opposite one another. What Wayne and O'Hara shared was different. Their scenes felt alive because they constantly challenged each other to raise the level of truth. Maureen's gaze softened slightly. "We were both stubborn," she said. Wayne nodded. That helped. The afternoon light continued to fade slowly, turning the bright hospital room into a softer, quieter space. For a while they simply sat together, remembering those long years of work. They spoke about the small details people rarely noticed. The long hours waiting for weather to cooperate during outdoor filming, the endless retakes when Ford demanded perfection, the camaraderie among crews who traveled from location to location, building entire worlds for the sake of storytelling. Eventually, Wayne spoke again. "You remember Ireland," he said. Maureen's eyes brightened instantly. How could I forget? Ireland had been special to her. It was home, the land where she had grown up before Hollywood ever entered her life. Filming The Quiet Man there had felt less like work and more like bringing two worlds together. "That film meant something different," Wayne said quietly. "Yes," she replied, "it did." He paused before continuing. "It showed something real." Maureen knew exactly what he meant. The story had not been about simple romance or adventure. It had been about pride, forgiveness, identity, and belonging. And those themes had resonated deeply with audiences across the world. Wayne looked back toward her. "You remember that long fight scene?" She smiled. "Oh, yes." The scene had become one of the most famous moments in cinema. It involved an extended confrontation between Wayne's character and another man, but it was Maureen's character who set the emotional stakes for the entire sequence. "It took 3 days to film," Wayne recalled. "And several bruises," Maureen added. Wayne chuckled softly. "You slapped me harder than anyone ever had." "That was the director's idea." "No," Wayne said, shaking his head slightly. "That was your idea." She tilted her head curiously. "How so?" Wayne's eyes held a spark of amusement. "Because you knew exactly how hard to hit." Maureen studied him for a moment. "You're still thinking about that slap after all these years?" He nodded slowly. "Yes." "Why?" Wayne took a slow breath. "Because it showed something important." She waited. "You hit me hard enough to make the scene honest," he said, "but not hard enough to actually hurt me." Maureen considered that. "That's called control," she said. Wayne's voice grew thoughtful. "No," he said, "that's called respect." Those words lingered quietly in the room. For a long time, Maureen had believed their partnership was built on professionalism alone. But now she realized Wayne had seen something deeper in those moments, a kind of trust that allowed two performers to challenge each other without crossing the line into harm. Wayne's gaze remained steady. "You knew how far to go," he said. "And you knew how to take it," she replied. He smiled faintly. Maybe that's why those scenes worked. Maureen reached forward gently and adjusted the edge of the blanket near his arm. The gesture was simple, almost instinctive, but it carried quiet care. "You were always stronger than you looked," Wayne said. She raised an eyebrow. "I'm Irish," she replied. "Strength comes with the territory." Wayne laughed quietly, then winced slightly as the movement cost him energy. After a moment he continued speaking, his voice softer now. "You know something else." "What?" "Hollywood changed a lot over the years." "Yes," she agreed. "It got louder," Wayne said, "more complicated." Maureen understood what he meant. The industry had shifted from disciplined studio productions to something more chaotic and publicity-driven. "But the work stayed the same," she said. Wayne nodded slowly. "That's the part people forget." He turned his head slightly to look at her again. "Good work always comes down to the same thing." "And what is that?" she asked. Wayne's voice carried quiet certainty. "Showing up, doing your part, respecting the people beside you." Maureen felt the truth of that statement settle in the room like an old, familiar melody. For decades, audiences had admired Wayne for his screen presence, but those who worked with him knew that his greatest strength was not fame or charisma. It was reliability. He showed up. He worked hard. He treated people fairly. That was his code. The light outside the window dimmed further as evening approached. The hospital corridor outside grew quieter as visiting hours slowly neared their end. Wayne seemed to gather his remaining strength. "There's something I want you to remember," he said. Maureen leaned closer again. "What is it?" Wayne looked directly at her, his voice barely above a whisper now. "Tell people we were professionals." The simplicity of the statement surprised her. "Of course we were," she said. Wayne nodded. "But people like to invent stories." Maureen understood immediately. Hollywood had always thrived on rumors, stories of secret romances, rivalries, and dramatic conflicts that sold magazines and filled gossip columns. But their partnership had never been that. It had been something quieter, something stronger. "Tell them we respected the work," Wayne continued. Maureen held his gaze steadily. "I will." Wayne's expression softened. "And tell them you made me better." For a brief moment, the confident actress who had faced down directors and producers without hesitation felt something stir deep in her chest. She rarely allowed emotion to show so openly. But those words mattered. "You made me better too," she said quietly. Wayne gave a faint nod, as if acknowledging a truth that needed no further explanation. The room fell silent once more. But this silence felt different. It was not empty. It was full of memory. Full of years spent building something meaningful through patience, discipline, and respect. And in that quiet hospital room, two old professionals shared the understanding that the work they had done together would continue long after both of them were gone. The quiet in the hospital room deepened as the afternoon slowly turned into evening. Outside the window, the golden light of Los Angeles softened into long shadows stretching across the city. Inside room 544, the world seemed to move at a different pace, as though time itself understood that this moment deserved patience. Maureen O'Hara remained seated beside the bed, her posture dignified yet relaxed. She had always carried herself with an air of confidence that came not from fame but from certainty in who she was. That certainty had been shaped long before Hollywood ever entered her life, back in Dublin where character mattered more than reputation. Now, sitting beside a man whose life had been built on a similar code, she felt the weight of years shared through work, discipline, and quiet respect. John Wayne's breathing remained slow but steady. The illness had taken its toll, leaving his once powerful frame weakened, yet the presence that had defined him for decades still lingered. Even now, there was something unmistakably strong about the way he looked at the world, as if the man who had stood tall in countless stories of courage still lived behind those tired eyes. For a while, neither of them spoke. They did not feel the need to fill the silence. Their friendship had never relied on constant conversation. It had been built through action, through scenes performed with honesty, through long days on film sets where words were often less important than commitment to the work. Eventually, Wayne shifted slightly and looked toward the window again. The fading sunlight caught the lines on his face, revealing the marks left by years of hard work, travel, and determination. Those lines were not signs of regret but of experience. They were the quiet record of a life lived fully. "You know something strange," Wayne said after a while, his voice softer than before but still clear enough to carry meaning. Maureen tilted her head slightly, giving him her full attention. "What's that?" she asked. "For a man who spent most of his life pretending to be someone else on screen," he continued slowly, "I never felt like I was pretending when we worked together." The statement hung in the air for a moment before Maureen responded. She understood exactly what he meant. Acting, at its best, was never about pretending. It was about revealing something true within the story. "That's because we never treated the work like a performance," she replied calmly. "We treated it like a responsibility." Wayne nodded faintly. "That's the word," he said, "responsibility." His gaze drifted again, as if remembering distant landscapes from the many films they had made together. The dusty plains of western towns, the green hills of Ireland, the busy studio lots where hundreds of people worked together to create stories that would travel across the world. You know what people think about acting, he continued. They think it's about attention, about applause, about being admired. Maureen's expression remained thoughtful. But the truth is different, she said. Wayne looked back at her with quiet agreement. The truth is that it's about trust, he said. She waited for him to continue. You trust the people beside you, Wayne explained. You trust that they'll do their part. You trust that when the moment comes, they'll give you something real to respond to. Maureen felt a quiet warmth in those words. That trust had defined every scene they had shared. You never failed that trust, Wayne added. She raised an eyebrow slightly. You didn't either. Wayne smiled faintly, though the movement was small and brief. Maybe that's why those films lasted, he said. The room grew quiet again. The hospital lights had begun to glow softly as evening settled outside. The gentle hum of medical equipment continued its steady rhythm, marking the passing minutes with quiet persistence. After some time, Wayne spoke again, this time more slowly. Do you remember the last picture we did together? He asked. Maureen nodded immediately. Big Jake, she said. That film had been made in 1971, nearly a decade earlier. By then, both of them were seasoned veterans of the industry, well aware of how much the world around them had changed. Wayne's voice carried a trace of reflection. The business was different by then, he said. New directors, new styles. Yes, Maureen replied, but the work was still the same. Wayne nodded. We still approached every scene the same way, he said. Prepared, focused, honest. Maureen remembered the set clearly. The younger actors had watched them carefully, studying the quiet professionalism that guided every moment of their performances. You know something, Wayne continued thoughtfully. The younger ones always asked me what the secret was. And what did you tell them? She asked. Wayne's eyes held a calm certainty. I told them there wasn't one. Maureen smiled slightly. That must have disappointed them. It usually did, he admitted. But the truth is simple. If you want to do the work well, you show up prepared and you respect the people around you. Those words carried the same philosophy Wayne had followed throughout his career. It was never complicated. It was never dramatic. It was simply consistent. For several minutes, the room fell quiet once more. Wayne seemed to gather his thoughts carefully, as though choosing the final things he wished to say. Finally, he turned his head again toward Maureen. There's one more thing, he said softly. She leaned forward again, sensing the importance in his voice. What is it? She asked gently. Wayne looked directly into her eyes, his gaze steady despite the exhaustion weighing on him. People will tell stories after I'm gone, he said. Maureen remained silent, allowing him to continue. They'll talk about the movies, the characters, the adventures. That's natural, she replied. Wayne shook his head slightly. But those things aren't the whole story. Maureen understood immediately. Fame had always simplified people into symbols, turning real lives into polished legends. What do you want them to remember then? She asked. Wayne paused, taking a slow breath before answering. I want them to remember that the work mattered, he said quietly, that we cared about doing it right. Maureen felt the sincerity of those words settle deeply within her. Wayne had never chased immortality through fame. What mattered to him was the integrity of the work itself. They will remember that, she said firmly. Wayne studied her expression carefully. You'll make sure they do, he replied. It was not a question, it was a quiet understanding. Maureen nodded once. I will. Wayne seemed to relax slightly, as if a burden had been lifted from his mind. For a few moments he simply watched her, the same way he had watched her across countless scenes over the years. There was something deeply familiar about the moment, something that felt less like a farewell and more like the closing of a long chapter written through years of shared effort. Then Wayne spoke again, this time almost in a whisper. You know something, Maureen? Yes. You were always the toughest one on set. She raised an eyebrow with faint amusement. Tougher than you? Wayne nodded slowly. Yes. She waited for him to explain. You never compromised, he said. If a scene wasn't honest, you said so. If something felt wrong, you challenged it. Maureen considered the memory. I believed the audience deserved honesty, she said simply. Wayne smiled faintly again. That's why they believed you. The room felt smaller somehow, filled with the quiet gravity of everything that had been said and everything that remained understood without words. After a while, Wayne closed his eyes briefly, gathering strength once more. When he opened them again, there was a final calmness in his expression. Maureen, he said softly. Yes. Thank you. She looked at him steadily. For what? She asked. For making the work mean something, he replied. The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of nearly 3 decades of collaboration. Maureen reached forward gently and placed her hand over his for the first time during the visit. The gesture was quiet but sincere, a rare moment of physical connection between two people who had always expressed respect through their actions rather than sentiment. You did the same for me, she said quietly. Wayne squeezed her hand with the little strength he had left. The movement was small, but it was enough to convey everything he meant. Outside the room, the evening had fully settled. The lights in the hallway glowed softly, and the hospital staff moved quietly through their routines. Inside room 544, 2 old professionals sat together in the final calm moments of a partnership that had shaped some of the most memorable scenes in cinema history. And though neither of them said it aloud, both understood that this conversation would be their last. The evening air outside UCLA Medical Center had cooled by the time Maureen O'Hara finally rose from the chair beside John Wayne's bed. For nearly an hour she had sat with him, speaking softly about memories that stretched across decades, about work that had defined a generation of cinema, and about the quiet respect that had formed the foundation of their partnership. Neither of them had tried to make the moment dramatic. That had never been their way. Their entire relationship had been built on restraint, professionalism, and a shared belief that dignity mattered more than spectacle. As Maureen stood beside the bed, she paused for a moment, studying the man she had known for nearly 30 years. The illness had changed his physical appearance in ways that would have startled the millions of people who remembered him as the towering hero of Western films. Yet there was something in his expression that remained unmistakably the same. The calm steadiness in his eyes, the quiet confidence that had defined his screen presence, still lingered. It was the look of a man who understood that life, like the stories he had told on screen, was defined not by how loudly it ended but by how faithfully it had been lived. Wayne's gaze followed her as she moved toward the door. His breathing was slow, and the effort of speaking had grown increasingly difficult, but he seemed determined to remain present in the moment. Maureen reached the doorway and rested her hand briefly on the handle. For a moment she hesitated, not because she feared leaving, but because she understood the significance of the moment. They had shared something rare in Hollywood, a professional partnership untouched by gossip or personal drama. It had been defined by discipline, by mutual challenge, and by an unspoken understanding that their work mattered. She turned back toward him one last time. Wayne was watching her quietly. Maureen, he said, his voice now barely above a whisper. She stepped closer again so she could hear him clearly. Yes, Duke. For a moment he simply looked at her, as if gathering the final strength required to say what he needed to say. Then he spoke slowly, each word deliberate. Tell them something for me. Maureen waited. Tell them we were professionals. The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of everything they had built together. In a world where stories were often exaggerated and relationships were turned into entertainment, he wanted the truth preserved. Their collaboration had not been about spectacle or personal drama. It had been about respect for the craft. Maureen nodded once. I will, she said quietly. Wayne seemed satisfied with that answer. The faintest trace of a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. It was not the confident grin audiences remembered from his films, but it was enough to show that he felt understood. Maureen turned again toward the door and stepped into the hallway. Immediately the murmur of voices reached her ears. Several reporters who had been waiting outside noticed her appearance and moved forward with cautious urgency. They carried notebooks and cameras, their expressions hopeful that she might provide some insight into the condition of one of the most recognizable figures in American cinema. Miss O'Hara, one of them asked politely, how is he doing? Another reporter raised a microphone slightly. Did he say anything about his career? Maureen paused briefly, but did not respond. She had spent enough years in the public eye to understand how easily private moments could be turned into headlines. What had been said in that room belonged to the two of them alone. Without offering a comment, she walked calmly down the corridor. Her posture remained composed, her expression thoughtful but steady. The reporters watched her leave, sensing that the quiet dignity she carried was itself an answer. Inside room 544, John Wayne rested against the pillows once more. The conversation had drained the little strength he had left, but there was a sense of peace in the room now. The thoughts he needed to express had been spoken, and the person who understood them best had heard them. Over the next few days, his condition continued to weaken. Doctors and nurses moved gently through the room, adjusting equipment, speaking quietly with family members, and doing everything possible to ensure his comfort. Outside the hospital, the news of his declining health spread quickly. Television stations discussed his career, newspapers printed photographs from his most famous films, and audiences across the country remembered the characters who had shaped their understanding of courage and honor. 3 days after Maureen's visit, John Wayne passed away peacefully. The announcement of his death traveled rapidly across the world. Tributes came from political leaders, fellow actors, filmmakers, and millions of fans who had grown up watching his films. For many people, he had represented a particular kind of American heroism, steadfast, principled, and unafraid to face adversity. At the funeral service held shortly afterward, the atmosphere was filled with quiet reverence. Friends, colleagues, and admirers gathered to honor the man whose presence had defined an era of storytelling. Among those in attendance was Maureen O'Hara, seated quietly toward the back of the room. She did not seek attention. She did not give interviews that day. While others spoke publicly about Wayne's accomplishments and legacy, she remained silent, her thoughts focused on the conversation they had shared in the hospital room. For her, the most important tribute was not delivered through speeches or television coverage. It lived in the memory of that final exchange, in the understanding they had reaffirmed about what truly mattered. Years passed. Hollywood continued to evolve, introducing new styles of filmmaking and new generations of actors. Yet the films Wayne and O'Hara had created together remained beloved by audiences. Their performances still carried the same authenticity that had made them powerful decades earlier. Occasionally, journalists would ask Maureen about her memories of working with John Wayne. She always spoke with respect, describing him as a dedicated professional who approached every project with discipline and seriousness. But she rarely spoke about their final meeting. That moment had been private. It was not until many years later, during an interview reflecting on her career, that she finally chose to share a glimpse of that last conversation. She described the quiet of the hospital room, the dignity Wayne had maintained even as his strength faded, and the message he had asked her to remember. He wanted people to understand that the work mattered, she explained thoughtfully. He believed that if you showed up prepared and treated the people around you with respect, the rest would take care of itself. The interviewer asked her whether she believed Wayne had achieved the legacy he hoped for. Maureen paused before answering. Yes, she said finally, because the films still speak for themselves. When Maureen O'Hara passed away many years later at the age of 95, her family sorted through her personal belongings. Among her photographs, they discovered an image taken during the filming of The Quiet Man. In the picture, she and Wayne sat several feet apart between takes, both studying their scripts carefully. There was no theatrical pose, no attempt to create a glamorous image. Instead, the photograph captured two professionals preparing for the next scene, each focused on doing the work well. On the back of the photograph, written in Maureen's elegant handwriting, were two simple words. Partners. That word captured everything about their collaboration. They had not relied on gossip or public displays of friendship to define their relationship. Instead, they had built something lasting through mutual challenge and shared commitment. The legacy of John Wayne and Maureen O'Hara was never about spectacle. It was about the quiet power of professionalism, about the belief that respect and dedication could create something meaningful. Their films continue to endure because they were built on that foundation. Each scene carried the authenticity of two performers who understood that great storytelling required effort, honesty, and trust. And in the end, the final message Wayne had shared in that hospital room remained the most fitting summary of their partnership. They were professionals. Two artists who showed up, did the work, respected one another, and left behind stories that would continue to inspire audiences for generations. Sometimes the most powerful legacies are not the loudest ones. Sometimes they are built quietly, scene by scene, through years of shared effort. That was the legacy of John Wayne and Maureen O'Hara. A legacy of quiet strength, mutual respect, and work done with honor.